shattering pipes, killing engines, and turning the wind into a chorus of screaming steel, the extreme freeze did far more than simply turn water to ice. As a sudden -22-degree polar vortex swallowed the Wyoming plains and transformed standard barns into wooden tombs, only one person was truly prepared, the exact man the entire town had dismissed as a lunatic. The summer of 2023 in Sheridan, Wyoming, was brutal, but the heat wasn't what had the locals talking. It was the massive, gaping crater being excavated on the south side of Thanos Pendleton's property. Thanos was a quiet, 62-year-old horse breeder, known for raising some of the sturdiest quarter horses in the county. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was respected until the backhoes arrived. Month after month, massive yellow earth movers tore into the limestone and clay hillside behind his modest ranch house. "Pendleton's digging a grave for his life savings," Caleb Hodges remarked one morning at Sarah Billings's feed store. Caleb owned the neighboring Blackwood Ranch, a sprawling, multi-million-dollar operation with pristine white fences and massive, climate-controlled above-ground barns. He leaned against the counter, shaking his head. I asked him what he's building. You know what he told me? An underground bunker. For his horses. The man has officially lost his marbles. Sarah laughed, ringing up a sack of sweet feed. I heard he took out a second mortgage for it. Paranoia is an expensive hobby. The gossip wasn't unfounded. To the outside observer, Thanos's project looked like the desperate act of a doomsday prepper. He had hired a specialized commercial engineering firm from Cheyenne to pour thick, steel-reinforced insulated concrete forms, ICF, into the earth. He installed intricate drainage systems, massive industrial ventilation shafts disguised as silos, and miles of geothermal tubing that sank even deeper into the bedrock. But Thanos had his reasons, buried deep in a trauma no one in town fully understood. Back in the catastrophic blizzard of 1996, a younger Thanos had lost his entire herd. The roof of his traditional barn had collapsed under the weight of wet snow, and the sub-zero winds had frozen his trapped horses before he could dig them out. The sound of their panicked whinnies over the howling wind had haunted his nightmares for almost 30 years. He had sworn over the frozen bodies of his animals that he would never let it happen again. When Caleb confronted him at the fence line in late August, Thanos didn't flinch. "You're ruining the property value, Art," Caleb sneered, gesturing to the concrete entrance that looked more like a military bunker than an equine facility. "If you're scared of a little frost, buy some propane heaters like the rest of us. You're sinking $500,000 into a hole in the ground." "Propane runs out, Caleb," Thanos replied softly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Power grids fail. The Earth stays at a constant 55 degrees once you get down far enough. It's geothermal insulation. Nature's furnace." "It's a dark, damp cave," Caleb shot back. "Your horses are going to go blind or die of respiratory infections from the ammonia buildup. It's animal cruelty is what it is." "I have hospital-grade air exchangers, Caleb. The air down there cycles completely every 20 minutes, and there's full-spectrum lighting." Thanos turned back to his tractor. "You build your way, I'll build mine. Let's see who sleeps better when the sky drops." By October, the subterranean barn was finished, covered by a thick layer of topsoil and seeded with prairie grass. It was virtually invisible from the road, save for the reinforced steel blast-style doors built into the hillside and the ventilation pipes jutting up like periscopes. The town's mockery reached its peak. They called it Pendleton's Tomb. The local high school kids even drove by on Halloween, daring each other to touch the steel doors. Thanos ignored them all. He calmly led his 6 prized horses, including a heavily pregnant mare named Daisy and his majestic lead stallion, Apollo, down the gently sloping concrete ramp. As the massive steel doors sealed shut behind them, the chaotic noise of the autumn wind vanished, replaced by a deep, resonant silence and the soft hum of the air handlers. It was warm. It was safe. He didn't know it yet, but he had finished just in time. The meteorologists started sounding the alarm in the second week of December. They called it a Siberian Express, a massive, anomalous detachment of the polar vortex that was pulling a deep freeze straight down from the Arctic Circle, colliding with a moisture-heavy atmospheric river. At first, Sheridan residents weren't overly concerned. They were Wyoming ranchers. They knew snow. Caleb Hodges even bragged on a local radio show about his new automated diesel generators and the high-tech infrared heating system in his massive timber barns. But on December 18th, the atmosphere didn't just get cold, it fractured. The temperature dropped from a mild 35 degrees Fahrenheit to 0 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 4 hours. By nightfall, it was minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. By midnight, the thermometer plummeted to a staggering, bone-snapping minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was just the ambient temperature. With the hurricane-force winds whipping across the plains, the wind chill hit an apocalyptic minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold was no longer just weather. It was a physical weapon. It froze the grease in tractor axles. It shattered cheap vinyl fencing. And then, the first twist of the knife. The regional power grid, overwhelmed by millions of heaters clicking on simultaneously across 3 states, suffered a catastrophic cascading failure. At Blackwood Ranch, Caleb Hodges was abruptly plunged into darkness. He cursed, waiting for his massive automated diesel generators to kick in. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. He threw on his heavy parka and fought his way outside. The wind physically threw him against the siding of his house. The cold seared his lungs like inhaling broken glass. When he finally reached the generator shed, his heart plummeted into his stomach. In his arrogance, he had purchased standard summer blend diesel. At minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, the fuel had completely gelled, turning into a thick, useless wax. The generators were dead. Panic setting in, Caleb waded through waist-deep snowdrifts to his prize multi-million-dollar barns. Without the infrared heaters, the cavernous wooden structures offered no insulation. The ambient temperature inside the barn was already dropping below 0. His groomsmen were frantically trying to break the ice in the water troughs with sledgehammers, but the water was freezing again almost instantly. The horses, including a $2 million imported warm blood, were shivering violently, their breath turning to frost on their muzzles. 3 miles down the road, Thanos Pendleton sat in a folding chair, sipping a hot cup of black coffee. He was 20 feet underground. Above him, the storm was raging with enough force to rip roofs from houses. But down here, it sounded like nothing more than a faint, muffled whisper. The ambient temperature inside the subterranean barn, warmed entirely by the geothermal heat radiating from the deep earth and the body heat of the 6 horses, hovered at a comfortable 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The heavy-duty battery banks, charged by his solar array all summer, quietly ran the ventilation system, ensuring the air was crisp and clean. Full-spectrum LED lights cast a warm, sunny glow over the large, padded stalls. Daisy, the pregnant mare, was asleep on a bed of fresh pine shavings. Apollo was calmly munching on Timothy hay. They were entirely oblivious to the freezing apocalypse occurring just 30 feet above their heads. Thanos patted Apollo's neck, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over him, mixed with a deep, lingering sadness for the animals he couldn't save all those years ago. Never again, he had promised, and he had kept it. He was just about to turn off the main lights and retire to the small cot he had set up in the tack room, when an anomalous sound cut through the low hum of the ventilators. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythmic, frantic thudding. Thanos frowned, walking toward the base of the concrete ramp. The sound was coming from the heavy steel blast doors at the surface. Someone, or something, was pounding on them with desperate, violent force. He checked the security monitor connected to the exterior cameras. The lens was mostly obscured by ice and driving snow, but through the static, he could make out a dark shape huddled against the steel door. It was a man, and he was dragging something massive behind him. Thanos threw on his coat and hit the hydraulic release for the doors. As the steel groaned and cracked the ice seal, a terrifying roar of sub-zero wind blasted down the ramp, bringing a cloud of white powder with it. Stumbling down the concrete slope, coated in a thick layer of ice, was Caleb Hodges. His lips were blue, his face frostbitten, and his eyes were wild with terror. But Thanos barely looked at Caleb. His eyes were fixed on the end of the lead rope wrapped around Caleb's frozen hand. Dragging behind him, barely able to stand, its coat covered in a shell of solid ice, was Caleb's prized $1,000,000 stallion. "Thanos!" Caleb croaked, falling to his knees on the concrete, his pride completely shattered. "Please! My barn is dead. They're all dying. Please! Let us in." Thanos didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the lead rope from Caleb's trembling, frost-bitten fingers. The wind screamed through the cracked opening of the blast doors, instantly dropping the temperature in the concrete corridor by 20 degrees. "Get him down the ramp, now!" Thanos shouted over the deafening roar of the vortex. Together, they hauled the massive, shivering warm blood down the slope. The horse, a magnificent Dutch warm blood named Winchester, was stumbling, his hooves skidding on the frost that was rapidly forming on the concrete. Once they cleared the threshold, Thanos slammed his fist onto the hydraulic control panel. With a heavy metallic groan, the thick steel doors sealed shut, cutting off the shriek of the storm. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Caleb's ragged gasping and the violent shuddering of the horse. Thanos immediately went to work. He sprinted to the tack room, returning with heavy thermal wool blankets and a portable infrared heat lamp. He threw the blankets over Winchester, ignoring Caleb, who had collapsed onto a bale of hay, weeping openly into his frozen hands. "He was freezing to death right in front of me," Caleb choked out, his voice raw. "The water pipes in my barn shattered. The wood is splitting. It's 30 below zero in there, Thanos. It's a graveyard." Thanos checked Winchester's vitals. The horse's heart rate was dangerously low, but the ambient warmth of the underground sanctuary was already beginning to melt the ice caked on his mane. "You walked 3 miles in a Siberian express for one horse?" Thanos asked quietly, his tone devoid of the judgment Caleb expected. Caleb looked up, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. "He was the only one I could get a halter on before the panic set in. My foreman, Wyatt, he's still out there. He refused to leave the others. There are 14 more horses trapped in the lower barn, Thanos. And the roof. The snow drift against the windward wall is so heavy, the roof trusses are buckling." Caleb buried his face in his hands. "I killed them. I killed my entire herd because I thought I was smarter than the winter." Thanos stood up slowly. The ghosts of 1996 flashed before his eyes, the memory of digging through packed snow to find the frozen bodies of his own herd. He looked around his pristine, warm bunker. It was designed to hold his 6 horses comfortably, with room for maybe 4 more in an emergency. 14 was pushing the absolute limits of the life support systems. But Thanos knew he couldn't sit in his warm, 58-degree sanctuary, while men and animals died in the frozen hell above. "Drink this," Thanos commanded, shoving a thermos of hot coffee into Caleb's hands. He turned and walked toward the heavy steel bulkhead at the far end of the facility, a section Caleb hadn't seen. "Where are you going?" Caleb asked, his teeth still chattering. "To get Wyatt and your herd," Thanos replied, throwing open the bulkhead doors. Behind the doors sat a massive, bright orange machine on heavy rubber tracks. It was a fully restored 1985 Theocal Sprite, a polar expedition snowcat Thanos had purchased from a bankrupt Colorado ski resort and meticulously rebuilt. Its insulated cabin and massive treads were designed for the most unforgiving alpine environments on Earth. "You can't go out there," Caleb pleaded, staggering to his feet. "Visibility is 0. The wind chill is -60. You'll die, Art." "I have a GPS navigation system tied to the topographical map of the county, and a 1,000-watt halogen light bar," Thanos said, tossing a heavy, fur-lined Arctic survival suit at Caleb. "Put that on. You're coming with me. We're going to need 2 sets of hands to tether them to the rig." 10 minutes later, the secondary tunnel doors opened. The Sprite roared to life, its heavy diesel engine chewing through the frozen air as it clawed its way up the ramp and into the blinding white maelstrom. The 3-mile journey to Blackwood Ranch, which usually took 5 minutes in a pickup truck, took nearly an hour. The snow was blowing horizontally, creating a dizzying, disorienting void. Inside the Sprite's cabin, the heater fought a losing battle against the cold radiating through the glass. When they finally breached the tree line of Caleb's property, the devastation was absolute. The majestic white vinyl fences were shattered into jagged plastic shrapnel. The main generator shed was buried under a 10-foot snowdrift, and the massive timber lower barn, the pride of Blackwood Ranch, was leaning precariously, its roof visibly sagging under tons of ice and snow. Thanos rammed the snowcat straight through the frozen paddock gates, parking it inches from the barn doors to act as a windbreak. They found Wyatt inside, severely hypothermic, desperately trying to keep the panicked horses moving to generate body heat. The air inside the barn was filled with the terrifying sound of snapping timber. The roof was failing. "We have to move them now," Thanos screamed over the wind roaring through the gaps in the walls. "Tie them in a line. The cat will break the trail, but they have to walk." It was a brutal, agonizing evacuation. They formed 2 lines of 7 horses, tethering their halters to the heavy steel tow hooks on the rear of the Sprite. Thanos took the wheel, putting the machine into its lowest gear, crawling forward at barely 2 miles an hour. Caleb and Wyatt walked alongside the herds, using their own bodies to shield the animals' faces from the slicing wind, screaming encouragement until their throats bled. Twice, a horse stumbled and fell into the deep snow. Twice, Caleb, the arrogant millionaire who had previously never dirtied his hands with manual labor, threw himself into the snowdrifts, physically heaving the massive animals back onto their feet, risking his own life to keep the line moving. They were racing against the cold, and the cold was winning. By the time the dark, heavily fortified entrance of Thanos' bunker appeared through the whiteout, the horses were stumbling, their coats entirely white, their eyes glazed with frost. The descent into the bunker was nothing short of controlled chaos. Navigating 21 panicked, half-frozen, 1,000-pound animals down a steep, icy concrete ramp and into a subterranean enclosure required a miracle of human endurance. The heavy steel doors groaned in the freezing tempest as Thanos backed the Sprite in just far enough to block the wind, creating a temporary windbreak. Caleb and Wyatt, their faces smeared with frost and diesel exhaust, physically pushed and dragged the terrified horses downward. Winchester, the million-dollar Dutch warm-blood, balked at the threshold, his hooves skidding on the frost-slicked concrete. It took Caleb throwing his entire body weight against the horse's hindquarters to break his paralysis. When the last shivering mare was finally inside, Thanos slammed his fist onto the hydraulic control panel. The thick steel doors sealed shut with a deafening, metallic thud, instantly severing the shriek of the -60 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill. The immediate silence was jarring, leaving a pressure ringing in their ears. But the sanctuary was rapidly descending into a new, unseen crisis. Thanos' underground barn was an undisputed engineering marvel, meticulously calibrated for a specific biological load, 6 horses and 1 human. Now, it held 21 massive, terrified animals, all hyperventilating from the trauma of the blizzard. The ambient temperature, initially a comfortable 58 degrees Fahrenheit, began to skyrocket as the sheer volume of body heat radiated into the confined space. Worse, as the thick crusts of ice and snow began to melt off the animals' coats, the humidity inside the bunker spiked violently. Thick, heavy steam rolled off the thawing bodies, gathering near the ceiling and dripping down the concrete walls like rain. Within 20 minutes, the air grew incredibly dense, tasting of wet wool, ozone, and panic. Then, a sharp, piercing, digital klaxon echoed off the concrete walls. On the main electrical panel, an LCD screen flashed a terrifying warning in bright crimson. CO2 levels critical. Scrubber overload. Oxygen depletion imminent. "The scrubbers can't handle their respiration," Thanos yelled, his voice barely cutting through the anxious whinnies of the crowded herd. He sprinted to the electrical panel, his frostbitten fingers slipping on the dials. "The air is getting toxic. There's too much carbon dioxide. If I don't increase the air exchange rate, we're all going to suffocate in here." "Then turn them up!" Caleb coughed violently, wiping a mixture of sweat and melted snow from his pale face. He was leaning against a stall door, his chest heaving as he fought for breath in the thinning air. "I can't just flip a switch," Thanos shot back, pulling off the metal casing of the override panel. "The system is running on battery banks. If I push the geothermal impellers to maximum output to clear this air, it will drain the reserves in less than 4 hours. The solar panels are buried under 4 feet of snow. We have no way to recharge." "Do it," Wyatt rasped. The foreman had collapsed onto a bale of Timothy hay, wrapped tightly in a silver thermal blanket, shivering uncontrollably from advanced hypothermia. 4 hours is better than 4 minutes, Thanos. We can't breathe." Thanos stared at the digital readout. It was a brutal wager. Risk suffocation now, or risk freezing in the dark later if the storm didn't break. Gritting his teeth, he bypassed the safety limiters, forcing the massive hospital-grade air handlers into absolute overdrive. A deep, industrial roar shook the floorboards as massive volumes of fresh, tempered air were forcefully pulled through the geothermal tubes and violently cycled into the room. The thick curtain of steam began to dissipate. The red warning lights blinked off, replaced by a steady amber glow. But on the secondary screen, the battery dial began dropping with terrifying, relentless speed. They had bought themselves a narrow window of time, but the extreme stress of the environment had just triggered another devastating emergency. From the far corner stall, a high-pitched, guttural sound cut through the heavy mechanical drone of the fans. It wasn't a standard whinny. It was a scream of pure biological agony. Thanos' blood ran cold. He sprinted down the crowded center aisle, pushing past Caleb's thoroughbreds. In the oversized foaling stall, Daisy, his heavily pregnant quarter-horse mare, had collapsed onto the fresh pine shavings. She was thrashing violently, her coat lathered in a thick, foamy sweat. Her eyes were rolled back, showing the whites, and she was kicking out at the walls with enough force to splinter the thick oak boards. "No, no, no," Thanos muttered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Daisy, easy girl." "What's happening?" Caleb asked, limping over to the stall, his own exhaustion temporarily forgotten. The severe barometric pressure drop, the adrenaline, the stress of the storm, the new horses crowding her, Thanos stammered, his hands trembling as he tried to assess the mare. She's going into labor, and she's nearly 3 weeks early. Thanos was a seasoned breeder, but his hands were still numb, his mind sluggish from the cold exposure, and his heart was hammering against his ribs. He watched as Daisy let out another agonizing groan, her body contracting violently. Thanos felt for the foal, his face paling as he realized the horrific truth of the situation. "It's a dystocia," Thanos whispered, panic finally seizing him. "It's a breach. Only one foreleg is presenting, and the head is turned back. I can't reach the shoulder to turn it. She's going to tear, Caleb. She's going to die, right here." The ghosts of 1996 flooded Thanos' mind. He had built this impenetrable fortress to save his animals, only to be trapped inside it, watching one die slowly. "Art, move," a voice commanded. Thanos blinked, looking up. Caleb Hodges was stripping off his soaked, heavy parka. He unbuttoned his flannel shirt, rolling the sleeves up past his biceps. All the arrogance, all the wealthy posturing of the Blackwood Ranch owner had completely vanished. In its place was a fierce, clinical focus that Thanos had never seen before. Before inheriting his father's millions, Caleb had spent over a decade as a large animal veterinarian in the brutal backcountry of Montana. "Wyatt, I need clean towels, iodine, and any surgical lubricant you have in that tack box," Caleb barked, dropping heavily to his knees beside the thrashing mare. "Thanos, get to her head. Keep her pinned down. Do not let her stand up, or she'll crush the foal and rupture her own uterus. Hold her down." For the next 2 excruciating hours, while a historic, lethal blizzard leveled the county 30 feet above them, a desperate battle for life played out below the earth. The air handlers roared relentlessly, the battery gauge ticking down past 30%, then 20, then 15. The 20 other horses stood in an eerie, watchful silence, their primal instincts sensing the life-or-death struggle occurring in the corner stall. Caleb buried his arms nearly up to his shoulders inside the mare. He was working entirely blind, fighting against the crushing, powerful contractions of a 1,000-pound animal. His face was contorted in pain, sweat pouring down his forehead and stinging his eyes. "The neck is twisted laterally," Caleb grunted through clenched teeth, his muscles trembling from the sheer physical exertion. "I have the left hoof, but the right shoulder is jammed against her pelvis. Give me a minute. I have to push the foal back into the uterine cavity to make room to turn the head," Daisy screamed, violently tossing her head. Thanos threw his upper body over her neck, stroking her muzzle, speaking in a rapid, desperate whisper. "You are safe. You are warm. I've got you, girl. I won't let the cold take you." "Come on, you stubborn bastard," Caleb growled, his arms straining. Blood and amniotic fluid stained his shirt. "Turn! Turn!" Suddenly, Caleb gasped, a look of profound relief washing over his exhausted features. "Got the head aligned," Caleb yelled, his voice hoarse. "Thanos, when she pushes on the next contraction, you need to pull on the forelegs. We have to pull with her, not against her. Ready?" Daisy let out a deep, shuddering groan, her abdominal muscles seizing. "Now! Pull!" Thanos scrambled to Caleb's side, grabbing the slippery forelegs. Together the 2 men leaned back with every ounce of remaining strength they possessed. With a final, agonizing heave, the foal slid free onto the soft, blood-soaked pine shavings. For 5 terrifying seconds, the bunker was dead silent. The foal lay motionless, enveloped in the amniotic sac. Caleb lunged forward, furiously tearing the sac away from the foal's muzzle and aggressively clearing the fluid from its nostrils with his fingers. He rubbed the small animal's ribs vigorously with a rough towel. "Breathe," Caleb pleaded. "Breathe, damn it!" The foal suddenly gasped, its entire body shuddering. It shook its heavy, wet head, blinking against the bright LED lights, and let out a small, high-pitched, wet whinny. Caleb collapsed backward against the wooden stall wall, covered in afterbirth and sweat. A massive, exhausted, delirious grin spread across his face. Thanos looked at the millionaire, a man he had despised just 24 hours ago, then down at the living, breathing foal trying to untangle its long legs. Thanos leaned against the concrete wall and finally let out a breath he felt he had been holding for nearly 30 years. 10 minutes later, as Wyatt handed out the last of the hot coffee, the bunker suddenly went pitch black. The deep rumble of the air handlers abruptly died. The battery gauge had hit absolute zero. The silence that rushed into the subterranean barn was heavy and terrifying. Thanos immediately tensed, expecting the air to grow rapidly stale, expecting the biting chill of the earth to slowly creep in and finish them off. He switched on a small, battery-powered emergency lantern, casting long, dancing shadows over the 22 horses now occupying the space. He walked slowly to the exterior monitoring station. The screens were dead, but the analog pressure gauges mounted on the concrete wall told a different story. The barometric pressure needle, which had been buried in the red zone for over 18 hours, was steadily rising back to normal. The mechanical wind speed indicator, wired to the surface anemometer, had dropped entirely to zero. The Siberian Express was over. When the Wyoming sun finally pierced the deadly atmospheric vortex later that morning, the town of Sheridan awoke to immense, catastrophic ruin. Yet, from beneath a snow-covered hillside that everyone had mocked, Thanos Pendleton and Caleb Hodges pushed open heavy steel doors to reveal 19 surviving horses stepping out into the brilliant, blinding daylight, followed by a wobbly, newborn foal. The subterranean barn wasn't a tomb. It was an ark. The mockery ended forever that morning, replaced by a profound, silent respect for the quiet man who dug deep into the earth to outsmart the freezing, ruthless winter sky.